Hi, my name is Jean-Sébastien Chevalier,
And I'm Pierre-Olivier Bonin.
and we both work for the Canadian Forest Service. So today we will present the work that has been done in the Canadian Forest Service over the past 2 years to improve diversity in the Canadian forest sector. The focus on our presentation will be more around the process than the results. Our goal is to share how we managed to come up with recommendations and translate them into concrete measures to help improve diversity. So I will start by providing some context, describe the analytical work that was done, and present the recommendations that were made. Pierre-Olivier will then proceed by explaining how we operationalize those recommendations and show preliminary results. I'll conclude by providing some lessons learned and recommendations. So first, for the context. So the Canadian Forest Service has 4 forest sector competitiveness programs that aim at supporting forest sector innovation, market access, and Indigenous participation. So those 4 programs are shown here. So FIP, IFIT, EMO, and IFI. Those are the acronyms because we like those. And so when it came to renew those programs in 2019, the federal government asked that the CFS puts in place some measures to improve diversity in the forest sector. And so next slide. And so we decided to come up with a process to ensure that the measures we design are evidence-based, based on facts and based on research that's done on the topic. And so what we did is that we first started with a statistical analysis, a socioeconomic analysis to be more precise. So we collected data, census data, and we proceeded with an in-depth analysis of the forest sector to understand where the gap were and try to come up with some reasons why those gaps existed. And so to help with this process as well, we created the CFS Diversity Working Group, which regrouped specialists around the department to help inform. And we also we did consultations with subject matter experts and stakeholders to inform our process to get the feedback from specialists from within the government, but also outside the government. And also feedback from industry, so that we hear what their experiences in that regard. And we came up with recommendations and then a plan to implement those recommendations. So we'll go quickly with look quickly at the statistics and what we found out in our research. So those are some of the key statistics or key results that we got from our analysis. So the first is that, unsurprisingly, that women are underrepresented in the forest sector compared to the average, the overall economy. There's fewer immigrants. Indigenous people are slightly more represented. Visible minorities are also underrepresented, and then that the forest sector workforce is aging. And so this was a good first step, but then we needed to understand why we observed those differences. And so on the next slide, the key areas that we found out, and based also on literature that we looked at, 2 main factors came as reasons as to why those gaps existed. So the first is the education profile. So we found out that the education profile for some of those groups did not match the needs of the forest sector. So for instance, for Indigenous people, the profile was quite different. And so for STEM, also the lack of STEM diplomation for some of those groups meant that they did not match the needs of the sector. The other key area that we found that was different was in terms of job location. So I mentioned Indigenous people having the different education profile, but also being slightly more represented. And that mainly because they're located where the jobs are. But you have cases, for instance, where there's studies demonstrating that women and newly arrived immigrants tend to be less mobile and tend to stay in urban areas. So in large urban areas and urban areas, whereas there's a lot less jobs in the forest sector. And so that was another issue that we identified, that's something we needed to address if we wanted to improve diversity in the forest sector. So next slide. So as I mentioned, we created the diversity working group to look into those findings, or those preliminary findings, and to try to get some more context around what we found. And so we organized those bi-weekly meetings. We had guest speakers, advisors from various areas of the government. We further looked at the literature and some other research that was done. And we consulted with industry. So we organized an open house, and we came up with some recommendations. And so next slide. So few problems that we've heard that came back. So the main issue, number one, was that we need to track diversity better. So it was one thing to understand that there was an issue, but it was difficult to really understand what the issue was. And so what we proposed was to collect better data to have a better understanding, but also to be able to track changes over time. Because census is fine, but it's only every 5 years, so it was not enough. Second, we needed to ensure that company and stakeholders, proponents, are taking this seriously, so that they are aware of the situation and that they are taking the situation seriously. So what we proposed, the recommendation, was to require recipients of programs money to have workforce and gender diversity plans. The third measure is the third problem that we've heard was the need to renew the workforce. So also to ensure that the available workforce matched the needs of the sector. And so what we proposed was to promote the forest sector as a post-secondary option, so through scholarship, to try to incentivize people to join the forest sector. And finally, it was what we heard, that there was a need to keep sharing information, to keep promoting this, or keep informing people on this situation. And so we proposed to continue promoting workforce diversity through collaboration and through presentation, such as what we're doing today. So on the next slide, now it's Pierre-Olivier will present some of the results.
Yes, so as my colleague mentioned, one of the most significant problems in addressing workforce diversity gap in the forest sector was the lack of data to track workforce diversity trends. With better data, stakeholders are able to make better informed decisions on tools and strategies to promote workplace diversity. This also allows to monitor the performance of programs and design new measures to achieve greater equity, diversity, and inclusion. So with the first measure, we've been taking first steps in collecting data. Specifically, the Canadian Forest Service Economic Analysis Division has developed diversity and inclusion questionnaires to measure employment equity group representation in the forest sector. Then at the Industry Relations and Innovation Programs Division, we process the data and put them together into visualizations. I'll show you this dashboard that we have to present you some preliminary results. These results are based on data from forest industry companies that have received funding as part of the 5th call for proposals of our program. Please keep in mind that the data set represents only a subsample of the forest industry, so it's expected that our results may not be nationally representative. If you're watching this, feel free to pause the video at any time you want to slow down the pace if needed. Here, while I'm taking you through the dashboard sections. So here, we can see a breakdown by gender. We can see a breakdown by age. We can see newcomers, Indigenous people, people who identified as visible minorities, and people with disabilities. We see that the distributions seem to reflect the general pattern of underrepresentation observed with StatCan's data. For example, women and visible minorities are underrepresented in the forest sector compared with the national economy. And so next, we designed measure number 2 to raise awareness about diversity and inclusion in the forest sector. To do so, we asked the forest sector to develop diversity and inclusion plans. With the IFIT program, since the 5th call for proposal held in 2020, recipients are required to submit data along with a plan for diversity and inclusion. Specifically, recipients are encouraged to improve gender balance and increase diversity within their corporate structures and supply chains. So to keep track and measure progress in future years, we developed a method to evaluate our recipients' diversity and inclusion plans. The first iteration of evaluation took place with the latest call for proposal in the summer of 2021. We received 24 diversity and inclusion plans from our recipients. And here you can see a few results from our first evaluation. We can see that the highest scoring plans were, well, this is not shown on that slide, but the highest scoring plans were very well structured and covered a wide range of criteria. For instance, they included a global perspective presenting the proponent's vision and priorities, detailed objectives and actions, a communication strategy, a set of measures individually adapted to as many groups as possible, and a measurement strategy including a general timeline and more specific milestones in some cases. Overall, we notice significant variation in terms of quality, with the lowest scoring plan having a 12% and the highest score of 98%. By applying the same method in future years, we hope that we'll be able to better capture change and better target areas that should be prioritized for improvement. Next up, with measure number 3, we sought to promote the forest sector as a post-secondary option through undergraduate scholarships in partnership with the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada. So, as explained by NSERC on their website, the Undergraduate Student Research Awards were meant to nurture the students' interest and fully develop their potential for a research career in the natural sciences and engineering. They were also meant to encourage them to undertake graduate studies in these fields by providing research work experience that complements their studies in an academic setting. NSERC is acting on the evidence that achieving a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive Canadian research enterprise is essential to creating the excellent, innovative, and impactful research necessary to advance knowledge and understanding and to respond to local, national, and global challenges. So through its collaboration with NSERC, the Canadian Forest Service Forest Innovation Program has funded part of these awards. We have collected data for the first 2 academic years, and for these 2 first years combined, there was a total of 79 applicants, of which 55 were granted an award. Again, I'll take you through our dashboard, and you can pause at any time you want. So a few findings that we can note of. We see that a majority of applicants and award recipients were women. About 1/5 of the recipients identified as visible minorities. Only 5% of the recipients were Indigenous. No applicant or recipient identified as a person with disabilities. There was an almost even split between Francophones and Anglophones. And finally, a majority of both applicants and recipients were located in the province of Quebec, with some variation across both years. So let's go back to our slides and talk about our last measure, measure number 4. So as the last of our 4 measures, we've implemented in keeping with the Diversity Working Group's recommendations. We have engaged with both external and internal stakeholders to share information and promote workforce diversity through collaboration. For example, over the last year, Our division met with 5 different teams in our department to share expertise and present our diversity and inclusion evaluation method. Many of our teams are still in the early stages of developing and implementing an evaluation strategy for diversity and inclusion. Just like many in the forest sector are just beginning to develop measures to address diversity and inclusion in their company. All things considered, the objective laid out with measure number 4 is a work in progress. There's still a lot to learn about how to address such an important topic and what constitutes best practices in the forest sector. So this work should be considered a continuous process that will require consistent effort from all parties involved. Now let's wrap this up and recap our lessons learned and challenges.
Thank you. So finally, this has been a very complex, challenging process for us, but we're quite happy with the results that we've achieved and the improvement that were made. This was new. This was not something, there was very little we could look at and replicate. So we had kind of to start from scratch, and we had to overcome many hurdles, including a legal hurdle in terms of collecting data. It was something that was a bit of a difficulty at first. Can we do it? Can we not do it? And so in the end, it was fine, and it's actually very beneficial that we managed to do it, but we had to overcome that hurdle. So in terms of lessons learned specific to each measure, for the first one, for the data collection, so we need to continue improving data collection to gather data over many years in order to be able to identify trends, and so we'll keep doing that. Progress was made in terms of the diversity work plan. We've seen that companies are responding well, and we're hoping that we're going to get improving results over the coming years. For scholarship, there's been strong interest, and we wish to build upon that interest and to maybe even increase the amount that is provided, maybe a bit more targeted as well, to ensure that the groups that we want to have better representation in the forest sector based on the data that we're going to collect and what the data will show us, then we'll be able to adjust the measure in order to target better the groups that we need to, for which we need to improve the representation in the sector. And finally, we need to continue the engagement effort. And as we see, there's good benefits of it. It's good to have discussions with people and hear what they have to say, and to get that information to continue improving the work that we're doing. And so we hope that one day we'll get a fully representative forest sector. And so that concludes our presentation, and we hope that we helped you better understand the process we went through. And if you have any question, please do not hesitate to reach us. Thank you.